Welcome. Let's talk a little bit about what it might mean to be a good supervisor. So this is the start of a new series, the idea being that I'll speak to people about their supervising, how they go about being a better supervisor. I'll speak to people who have mentored supervisors, the supervisors of supervisors, and I'll also speak to people who have been and currently being supervised about their experiences, what they think a good supervisor means to them, and how they go about managing up, getting the most out of their supervising relationship. Why are we doing this? Why am I thinking about this? I've found over my career that there's a lack of thought sometimes on what it means to be a supervisor. There's almost an assumption, and there is a reality to this in some respects, that once you've got a PhD, you can supervise. And I find that to be quite problematic, really. A PhD is a necessary but insufficient part of being a good supervisor. In fact, you go a little bit further, and the skills that are attached to getting a PhD and to getting a publication record, maybe getting funding, don't actually align with the skills of being a good supervisor necessarily, depending on how you define that. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through this video. And why me? Why am I talking about this? I've experience in doing supervision, but mainly my main contribution here is that I think a lot about this process, what it means to be a supervisor, what it means to be a good supervisor for the people who you're supervising, because it's different in different places. I spend probably more time than I'd like to spend on this, ensuring that I can try and give over the best of myself that's required for the people that I'm supervising. To align what I'm saying and thinking and doing with what they need. And that process over the last few years has given me a few points that I'll go through today around what I think it takes and what I think are good reference points for developing your own ability as a supervisor. And none of this is super formal. I'm sure that there's formal qualifications in your own institution, but here's some of the thoughts that I have. This is there's two ways of thinking about this. Firstly is, how should you think about your relationship with the person, the other focus? And then the second part will be, how should you think about yourself? So I'll go through those now. So the first thing is, it's an acceptance that you're a mentor. The supervising relationship is more than just, here's a project, we do it together. There's a mentoring relationship. And then that requires reflection on what that means. What is a mentor? What does that look like? How do you mentor? What are the skills of a mentor? That's the first start point. If you accept that there's a mentoring relationship, then you accept that you need to develop as a mentor. That really helps. When you leave it at supervision, whatever that means on its own, I think you're missing a trick there. So accepting that you're a mentor, you're going to be a mentor to that person for good or bad, and now let's reflect on it and try and make it as good a mentoring relationship as possible. Second, and this is connected, you'll see there's a connection between these. There's a commitment to the development of the candidate. Seems like such an obvious statement, but a real strong commitment, and that your development, your career development, is actually a byproduct. And this is a kind of realignment. I think when people first chase after their getting a PhD student and supervision, it's for their own development. You want to advance as an academic, and one of the ways that you advance is to start doing your own supervision. But actually, that's the wrong way to think about it. I think most people realize that quite quickly. Actually, your personal development comes as a byproduct, as a very, very second, third, or fourth afterthought, and you may not develop because you're spending so much time developing others. So it's a shift to developing others. Their academic and personal development becomes one of your central focuses. And that's quite hard for people, especially if they've spent 4 years trying to finish their own PhD. An acceptance that it's not your journey, and that the skills that you developed in relation to your supervision relationship, the way that you were supervised, is not necessarily the skills or the directions that your supervisee will require. Your directions have to help them with their journey. It's quite a fundamental kind of shift, really. You've been on your own journey up until now a lot of the time, and now your directions that were for you don't necessarily fit the journey of someone else. Now, in terms of the pedagogy, the style of teaching, it's guided discovery at its very core. I think this is the pinnacle of guided discovery, and people who have done teaching qualifications will understand what that idea means. And if you're not sure around that area, just have a quick look. Guided discovery is the central element of this. This person you're working with is discovering something about the world, literally using science, hopefully something really, really original. And your job is there as just as a guide. And a guide can fall in the background, and especially towards the end of the PhD, do very, very little in terms of guiding, because that person is discovering on their own. But all that sounds very positive. There is also a fundamental place where you have to step in at the right time. And more forceful directions in the right path might be required at different times. So while I'm suggesting, yes, it is a focus on the other, and it's allowing the person to grow and to develop and all that sort of good stuff, at times there is a necessity to say, no, this is how this has to be done. Now, those times are few and far between, but I think in most PhDs they do happen, and they're usually for very, very good, important reasons. What I might call a come to Jesus moment. Okay, you've done this. This was wrong for these reasons, and this is how you need to sort this out. This is a teachable moment, a learning movement, move forward. But that still is a part of the supervising relationship. And I think some people can move so far into these positive processes where they're allowing the young people, the supervisee to explore the world and develop on their own, that the wheels can fall off. And your job is there to stop them falling off in the end. Okay, so then in terms of you, so that's how you think about the other and the person who you're supervising. What about you? How do you think about you? Well, first off, I think it's useful to have a mentor, a supervisor in the first instances. If you think that you don't need a supervisor when you first start supervising, you may well have an overinflated understanding of your own skill set. The first thing I did when I started supervising at PhD level was ensure that I had two very, very well qualified professors around me. Now, maybe you don't have access to that. Then try and find someone outside of your institution who can help. Most that I've bumped into, that I've worked with, most senior academics are very happy to help. Now, are they going to hold your hand all the way through it? No. It's you who's got to do the work. But trying to find a mentor who can be there to support, to throw ideas off, to let you know some of the things that you don't know will be really useful. Organization. And I say this because I am one of the least organized people I know at work. I'm very, very fortunate in that although my organization isn't great, I own that fact, and I encourage my PhD students to be organized themselves and to ensure that they're aware of my weakness in that regard, take ownership of their project, and make sure that that organization detriment that I have that lack of skill that I have is not a detriment to them. Now, I don't just defer that off. I still try and work on my own organization as much as possible. I mean, just as simple as turning up to supervision meetings on time and always correct, and having thought about them. I've known supervisors in the past, not that I've worked with, but others have worked with who aren't organized even at that level. So that is something to be aware of. But in a broad sense, knowing what the key steps are, knowing where the dates are, that sort of stuff, you can get that information. You don't have to run through the process to know it. The doctoral school that you're in will have that information. You can get it. Get yourself organized. And acceptance, I've already said that it's an acceptance, that it's a skill that you probably don't have just through qualifying with a PhD, but it's a skill that you can improve, will improve, but that requires you getting the repetitions in. Just getting strong in the gym, you have to go and put the time in. You have to go in, prepare for a meeting, get in the right mindset, understand that you're there to guide them and that the advice that you're going to give them is really important, and it needs to be the right advice for them, not the right advice for you. And you have to practice that. You have to reflect on it. And you have to ask for feedback from the supervisee, and you have to find out if what you've supplied has not been good enough or deficient in certain ways. That's very hard to get. Supervisees will be very, very reticent to tell you that you're not doing a very good job. But there are ways you can do that. You can ask other colleagues to find out how it's going, things like that. So an acceptance that it's a skill that you've got to develop, and then putting the repetitions in. An acceptance that you don't know what you don't know. So important. You know, as academics, we like to think that we're experts in certain areas. And until you've supervised, you haven't supervised. So how can you know? How can you know what it means? Especially if most of your time at schooling has been relatively successful, and then you've been supervised by someone who's relatively successful, and now all of a sudden you're at the deep end of being a mentor for this person. You don't know much about them. and acceptance that you don't know what you don't know, and honesty about that. Look, this is my first run at this. This is my second run or my third run. I'm still developing my own skills. We need to work together on this. And an acceptance of that process, and that gives you an opening to be aware of things that you're not sure about, to accept them and to put the effort in to manage them. And then finally, and then this is towards the end of the supervision relationship, an acceptance that the academic world that you succeeded in does not exist anymore. Even though it might be quite similar, it doesn't exist. It's gone. So I qualified in the end of 2011, early 2012. That world that I qualified in was not the world that my supervisor qualified in. Very, very, very different. And the world now is not the world that my supervisees will qualify in. It's very important to consider. The advice that I can give them is limited in that regard. I can support them, yes, publish papers here, publish papers there, try and get funding. The obvious stuff, pounds and papers is important, we know this. But it's a different world. There are different things going on. There are different ways that our academics are growing and moving into different areas. So an awareness that you don't know what you don't know, an awareness that the world that you qualified in is different, to then encourage the supervisee to understand that and to work around it and to manage their own development in that regard, that you're not an oracle. Okay, some points there. Hopefully that's useful. I'd love to chat with anybody about this. If you've got your own thoughts or ideas, you want to kind of just throw a few ideas at me about how you can be a better supervisor, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. I like these kind of moments of personal reflection that we have. So anyone has any questions, get in touch.